Free speech has come under attack by the extreme left, and of course, NPR has followed. In this clip, an NPR journalist interviews an internet law expert about Elon Musk and free speech. The clip is from April 15th of this year, 2022. Let's take a listen.
Twitter is a global platform. It has hundreds of millions of active users. So what does it mean now that the world's richest person wants to buy it while saying it's all about free speech? Kate Klonick joins me now to discuss. She's an assistant law professor at St. John's University in New York, and she focuses on private governance of online speech. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so already we have a problem.
She's picked someone who focuses on governance of free speech rather than a free speech advocate to play the part of a free speech advocate. Yeah,
correct.
Pretty apparent, right?
Why not ask a free speech advocate? So, I just read Andrew Doyle's book on free speech. It was excellent. Why not ask Michael Shermer? If you don't want public intellectuals, if you want maybe someone who's more academic, that's fine too. I mean, why is she picking somebody who's not an advocate for free speech? Okay, let's take a listen.
So, Professor Klonick, assuming Musk follows through with his effort to buy Twitter, what would it mean if one wealthy person could buy a platform with this kind of reach and essentially say, it's mine and I make the rules?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question because, of course, there are platforms like that are owned technically by one person already, and their boards, and so there'd still be some structure in place for this to be checked. But I think that we're seeing what this moment is really showing us for a lot of people is that these private platforms that govern our public speech rights are really susceptible to the power of capitalism and just being the fault lines.
Yet another boogeyman
that we expect to exist are being exposed.
So Elon Musk calls himself a, quote, free speech absolutist. He also has said he'll unlock Twitter's potential and allow all legal speech. So what do free speech advocates make of what he's saying?
We could ask a free speech advocate.
Why don't we ask a free speech advocate?
Let's see what she says.
That would be really interesting. Why don't we do that?
It'd be interesting.
Yeah, the concept of unlocking Twitter and allowing all legal speech on the platform is really complicated. For something to be
really, is it that is it really that complicated? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it is.
For something to be legal is actually a very difficult thing and to assess, and it's difficult between jurisdictions. And so one of the problems with what Musk is describing is in the United States, for instance, to allow all legal speech technically allowed under the First Amendment onto the platform, you would have to allow all spam to stay up on the platform. You would have to allow all pornography to stay up on the platform.
Okay, so we can so listen to what. So NPR does this all the time. They make connections to sully concepts. Listen to what she does.
All forms of hate speech. That's all First Amendment protected speech. And so all of that would stay up, at least within the U.S. It could make the platform functionally unusable.
I mean, this is a big discussion we're having in society right now about what is censorship and what is free speech, what's dangerous for society. And the platform has blocked users temporarily or permanently over controversial or hateful speech. The most prominent example being Donald Trump. Twitter kicked him off for violating a rule about glorifying violence after the 2021 Capitol attack. Would a platform owned by Elon Musk open the door again for speech that is being taken down and seen as dangerous?
It could potentially do that if he is able to go through with this, but this is something.
I just want to say, I just think it's so important to talk about this idea of the sullying of concepts, of the merging of one concept together with another concept. So
we could talk about this particular example using Donald Trump. I don't think I'll play the role of free speech advocate because there is none on this episode that she's talking to. The problem wasn't that Donald Trump was kicked off. The problem is because you kicked Donald Trump off and you still have tons of accounts like Antifa accounts where they're actually planning riots. I repost often and go through some of the
Right. You also have the Hezbollah on there.
Yeah.
You also have the Iranian Revolutionary Guards.
They
You
will
have the
plan and
spokesman
advocate
from
for
the
violence
Taliban.
downtown Portland on Twitter, and Twitter will completely ignore that. So the problem, and the reason why a lot of people, myself included, were happy when Elon Musk talked about buying it. The problem isn't because I don't want pornography on Twitter. I don't want hate speech on Twitter. What I don't want to see happen is I don't want to see Twitter skewed to one ideological party and have violence and things from the left allowed and people who advocate from the right taken down. And that's what we've seen time and time again.
Right.
That's the conversation.
Right. And so it's a combination of, all men or women get you banned. Or no, men or women. I can't remember what it is.
If you say a man can't have children on Twitter, you can be banned.
Right. Okay. So there is a content issue, and then there's the issue of the fair application of standards.
Exactly.
None of those things came up. And again, that to me here is what's going on at a deeper level is that idea of sullying concepts. Republicans don't like critical race theory, as if critical race theory were a Republican issue. Republicans are bad, therefore you should like critical race theory. It's
people who want to support free speech like hate speech or want to see child porn online.
Yeah, child porn.
That's not what's going on.
Or they're all Nazis running around.
It's not the conversation.
There's Zeke Heiling in the Starbucks.
And there is a happy medium there where you can have a platform where there is no pornography and you also don't adjudicate based on political bias, which is what people would like, especially when you have, I give you a very solid example of this was what happened with the Hunter Biden laptop.
Oh, yeah.
So the laptop came out, the New York Post wrote about it, and the New York Post was banned from Twitter before the election. That certainly had, when all our media in unison, the mainstream media said, oh, it's Russian propaganda, it's this and that certainly had an effect on the election. And now we know it's not Russian propaganda, it's Hunter Biden's laptop. The New York Post was right. But that definitely would not have happened if that laptop belonged to Trump. You know that, I know
100%.
that, we all know that. That's the problem. That infuriates people because it's not fair. Even if, like me, you're not somebody who was a Trump fan or would have voted for Trump,
same as
I
me.
understand that's not fair, and I understand it's dangerous for the country, and that's what the conversation's about, and they're not even alluding to that.
Correct.
They want to mix it all up and pretend like people who are into free speech want to see pornography online.
Yeah, and they want to just start goose-stepping everywhere. It's insane.
There's people on the left like Bill Maher who pointed this out as well. And I saw an interview he did not too long ago where he had the old leader for the ACLU on, and he talked about how the ACLU no longer advocates for that kind of free speech.
It's changing. I mean, it was a stalwart defender of free speech and civil liberties. Is it still that?
Not as much. I mean, they just produced a couple of years ago new guidelines for their lawyers to use when deciding what free speech cases to take. This is a requirement now for the national ACLU lawyers that before they take a case defending someone's free speech, they have to make sure that the speech doesn't offend or threaten other civil liberties values.
Yeah, and so even the ACLU, they would never allow Nazis to march in Skokie, Illinois anymore. Yeah.
This is something that, for those of us who have studied this for a while, and for people who have worked.
Those of us who have studied it for a while, we know. Let's take a concept. When you study something, you take a look at both sides of the issue. We know that she's not using the word study in any traditional way. She's looking at what are the arguments that support my position.
In this industry for the last 15 or 20 years, that there has always been these issues that have been lurking. I just think that they've been mostly invisible to the public. And so moments like Donald Trump being deplatformed or taken off Facebook and Twitter, and moments like this finally kind of expose to people that there are, like, who is empowered to speak as freely as they think they
We know exactly who's in power. We know exactly the kind of people who are exposed. When we know exactly what you can't say. We know the narratives. We know what is a blasphemy, and it's the exact opposite of what she's portraying.
It is.
can or not speak, how fragile those rights are online.
You know, again, the idea of banning people on Twitter, it's seen as censorship. On the other hand, we've seen people complain that hateful, problematic speech needs to be removed because it can lead to really dangerous moments. Is there a better way for Twitter and other platforms to?
Yeah, how about the fair application of standards?
Yeah, it could lead to dangerous moments, like you might have a taxpayer-funded institution advocating for a terrorist group like Antifa.
No.
Moderate content and still respect democracy and free speech.
I think that these platforms, I know that people don't typically want to hear this, but a lot of these platforms are doing the best they can to try to splice that decision, which is a decision that is one of the hardest decisions for courts to make. And it is.
They're doing their best they can to do what? What are they?
I'm going to give her a little bit of slack on this one because there are issues as it relates to things that they have to censor. And I could see how that would be very difficult, right? But that's not the conversation. The conversation is about political bias.
That's correct. If that were really the case, then other hateful groups would be censored equally. You'd have a uniform, fair application of the standards of Twitter's own standards.
Now, she probably does not believe, and a lot of NPR listeners that are listening to this probably do not believe that institutions like Twitter and Google have a political bias. I would say that there's no arguing the fact that they have a political bias. I would say that there's lots of examples you could give, but at the very least, let someone on who can argue that point, because 100%. That is what the conversation is about. That's why people were happy that Elon Musk was going to buy Twitter. Not because Elon Musk is going to put Donald Trump back on or because he's going to put pornography on, but because they were hoping he would have some sense of fairness between political ideologies.
And the uniform application of standards to everyone independent of the positions they espouse.
And I find it interesting how much that terrifies them.
I also find it interesting that they didn't even talk about it.
No.
One of the hardest decisions for these platforms to make. And so I think that this line between censorship and hate speech is much, much more difficult to assess at scale than people understand. And so this is also kind of one of these moments that exposes that. I think it's naive of Musk to kind of go in and think that he can just wave a wand and turn Twitter into the platform that he wants it to be, because the curation of these
okay, but that's not the criticism of Musk.
No.
Yeah.
Platforms is incredibly, incredibly complicated.
The former CEO of Reddit, Ellen Pao, recently wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Post criticizing how Musk might exercise his influence on the platform. And Musk tweeted about Jeff Bezos using his wealth to buy the Washington Post. Is this potential takeover of Twitter by Musk the same thing?
Yeah, that's a great comparison because it's just absolutely not. There's very strong kind of professionalized norms in journalism that split.
It's interesting how
professionalized norms.
Yeah, the professionalized norms is interesting, and it's remarkable how Elon Musk purchasing Twitter terrifies people.
Right.
But it only terrifies people who buy into certain ideological stances.
Right. I don't know anybody on the political right who was terrified by Elon Musk buying Twitter.
Right.
And it's not because they were hoping for hate speech. You know, what's interesting is she talks about how difficult it is to define hate speech. You can have on Twitter accounts owned by terrorist groups like Antifa where they will literally talk about the time and meeting place that they're going to meet to attack police officers. And that will be allowed. But you could have someone come on and say something like, I don't believe men can have children, and be banned, and that's considered hate speech.
Right.
And it's that ridiculous double standard that has infuriated people and pushed people to the point where they really do hope a billionaire comes in and saves the whole company because it seems rotten to the core.
Yeah, it's the new public space, you know. And again, so the examples that I were thinking of were more international examples where out and out terrorist groups that virtually everyone, independent of their
Hezbollah.
Yeah, ideological leanings would agree that
Hamas.
Terrorist groups. Yeah.
The Ayatollah's Twitter account.
Exactly. The spokesman for the Taliban. Okay.
Business and editorial. And Bezos' ownership of the Washington Post has almost nothing to do with the editorial side of the content. And the other part of this is that what Musk is trying to do with Twitter is to control users' speech and individual speech. And that's not something that the Washington Post does.
Assistant law professor Kate Klonick, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So there's so much to unpack there. But
I know.
with something like the Washington Post, it's not that simple. It's not as simple as she made it out to be. It's not just a simple case that they have the editorial page and then they have the stories that they run. It's also which stories they decide to run. There was a time when somebody on the left wrote quite well about this in Noam Chomsky when he was talking about how there's a filtering system for the stories that go up. And when you have somebody like Jeff Bezos who runs the Washington Post, it's very possible that there is a political bias that's enforced there. I don't know. That would be something I'd be interested in studying and looking at. I do know that there's a political bias on Twitter.
Yeah, and just to be clear, you mentioned Chomsky. Chomsky is an app. I wish that I miss the days of the old leftists. You know, Chomsky is a staunch advocate.
Why not interview him for this?
That would have been great. Yeah. Chomsky's a staunch advocate of free speech.
What I'm concerned about when it comes to controlling speech is our government. What I don't want to have happen is the government controlling speech. I'm not really concerned about other people in the United States controlling their speech. I'm not concerned about controlling other citizens' speech. I'm concerned about our government controlling our speech. And these people have it so backwards.
Unpack that.
When it comes to censorship, it's the government deciding what we can and can't say or what someone can or can't say that's truly dangerous because they can enforce that with violence. I'm not concerned about what some redneck or some far left hippie three doors down says on his personal Twitter account.
Right.
If they're openly advocating for violence the way Antifa does, take them off the site. If they hold weird fringe political views, who cares? But when it comes to censorship and the First Amendment, who we really have to watch out for is the government. And I think it's somewhat ironic that in the face of this purchase by Elon Musk, the Biden solution, which has since gone down the toilet because it was such a bad idea, was a Bureau of Speech Enforcement that they were going to put forth. And it was such an insane and stupid idea that fortunately it tanked. Yeah. But that's what was dangerous. And I can almost guarantee you that these stand-ins for free speech advocate that they interviewed probably thought that was a great idea. Let's get a Bureau of Misinformation and get some bureaucrat decide what we can and can't say.
Right.
Thank you for watching this excerpt from an episode of All Things Reconsidered. To watch the full episode, please follow the link in the description.